As a person with a PhD in sociology, I have had my share of methods and data analysis classes. If I had to count the number of classes I've taken in these areas, it might be around 15 or more. I've also taught classes on general research methods, on specific research methods, as well as all kinds of classes on qualitative data analysis. So I guess you could say I've had my share of research. You might be asking, why would anybody in the world take on so much research and so many research methods classes and teach classes in research methods? Well, the reason I did that is I generally enjoy doing research. I love the sense of discovery that it provides me. I enjoy finding new things out, even if it's just for myself. I like the process of exploring, learning, understanding, and formulating new areas of investigation. So for me, taking these courses was always an enjoyable experience, always a highlight of my education. One of my favorite topics in all of these classes was the topic of causal modeling. A causal model provides an illustrated depiction of how different variables relate to one another. The simplest form of a causal model is a basic hypothesis, which is just a statement of relationship between two or more variables in which some causality is indicated. You might think of it as an if-then statement. If this happens, then that will be the outcome. The strength of the relationship can be provided as well in terms of how strong an impact an independent variable or a causal variable has on a dependent variable or the effect. Sometimes that causality might seem pretty obvious, such as the amount of studying and the grade you earn. Ideally, the more you study means the higher grade you're going to get, or at least would expect to get. Whether or not that actually happens depends on a lot of other variables, but in general, higher the studying, the better grade you're going to receive. However, that causality might be harder to discern in other situations. Let's say, for instance, that you think organizational culture is going to influence employee attrition or the rate at which employee leaves an organization. Furthermore, you might assume that the worse the organizational culture, the more likely people are to leave, the higher the attrition rate will be. But what if the organizational culture is so good that people receive a lot of training and mentoring, resulting in them being able to find better opportunities in other organizations? This would mean that the causal relationship isn't working as we anticipated. It still might be there, but the better the culture, the more people might leave because they can leave. We might then measure some other variables, such as the feeling they have about the organization when they leave. Maybe that's a better outcome variable to look at to really understand what's going on. When we're looking at causality, we're always looking at this question of the chicken or the egg. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Let's take this one example, for instance. We might have more police in a community that has more crime. Well, that's correlation. Maybe more police in a community, more crime. But what's the causation there? What's happening between the two that's causing some kind of cause and effect? Now, you might think that we have more police in a location, that there's more crime because there's more crime. Therefore, the amount of crime in a neighborhood is going to cause there to be more police, or the number of police going up. So amount of crime is causing the number of police. But we might flip that. We might find that there's more crime in an environment because there's more police. In fact, the number of police is causing the crime rates to go up because the police are finding more crime, or the police are reporting more crime. We might realize that police or crime statistics are just a reflection of how much police are reporting crime going on. If you have less police, you have less crime being reported. It doesn't mean that there's less crime being committed. It means that the police are counting less instances of crime. So you can see this can get rather complicated in terms of what is causing what. So when we create causal models, we need to think critically about the relationships between the variables, as well as what variables are present in the model. When formulating what the problem is that we need to investigate and address, it's always important to critically examine whether the problem we think we have is in fact the problem we need to be concerned with. Is it in fact that problem? As a consultant, a company or an organization might say, I have this problem that I need you to address. but I'm always very careful to keep in mind that the problem they think they have might not be the problem they actually have. And it is common that the problem people think they have is not the actual problem that exists. In fact, the problem that they see and they state might be a symptom of a much larger problem. Or there might be another problem altogether that they haven't even thought about or considered. It can be difficult to say at the outset, but this is something we must consider when we're formulating the problem as part of our critical thinking process. So, for instance, let's look at something like type 2 diabetes. Among all the factors that can cause type 2 diabetes, unhealthy eating and being obese are among them. They're not the only factors. There's other factors we can consider in causing type 2 diabetes, but unhealthy food and obesity are two factors that we need to consider. If we have a higher incidence of diabetes, then we might just be thinking in terms of having the problem of treating it. That's the problem we think we have, and so that's the problem we try to address. We try to figure out how to treat the higher incidences of type 2 diabetes. Now, unhealthy eating might be caused by foods that have additives such as high fructose corn syrup and other kinds of sugars. Processed foods might be more unhealthy and cause higher incidence of obesity and type 2 diabetes. The more people eat those kinds of foods, the higher the change of obesity and type 2 diabetes. So now we're to processed and unhealthy foods as being the problem. However, perhaps those are the only foods available, and as a result, those are the only foods that are eaten. Some areas, especially some areas in the United States, might be known as food deserts, meaning that it's hard to find high quality fresh food that provides better nutrients. The only things available to people who live in those food deserts are foods that are not great. And so as a result, they're only able to make poor food choices because of what's available. Or it might be that people don't have time to cook better meals and thus become more reliant on poor food choices like fast food or processed food or pre-prepared foods, foods that aren't made from scratch. These same people might not be knowledgeable about making better food choices. Additionally, they might be sedentary in their lifestyle, causing them to have a higher rate of obesity. In this image from a study on disease models, we can see how various environmental and social factors can contribute to type 2 diabetes. Low walkability. People can't easily walk around, get exercise. Few recreation facilities. Few green spaces, coupled with poor access to good food and easy access to bad food, are all depicted here. We could even go deeper into each of these areas, each of these boxes, and explore causal factors associated with them. You can see how pretty quickly things can, in fact, get pretty complicated. One of the nice things about causal models is that it allows us to kind of sketch out, depict, illustrate the nature of those relationships and all of the various factors that are going on. When we think in terms of systems thinking, we're really thinking in terms of the complex causality at play on these different things affecting the larger topic that we're curious about solving or addressing. The causal elements of type 2 diabetes can be highly complex and multifaceted. When healthcare professionals talk of something like social determinants of health, they are referring to the larger complex of social factors that influence healthcare outcomes. So it's not just the physiological, genetic, biological factors that influence healthcare. It's also the social factors that can influence and have a huge influence on healthcare. By thinking in these terms, we can more fully explore and understand and formulate the factors at play regarding any particular problem. And we need to train ourselves to be able to think intentionally and consciously when we are formulating a problem that we're seeking to address and improve or at least deal with. Thus, in terms of diabetes, we find that only treating diabetes itself does not address the root causes. It addresses a symptom of larger causes. And if we only address the symptom, we're never going to solve the problem. Now, let's apply the same approach to an actual military problem. A crucial factor in troop readiness and performance is morale. There could be any number of reasons as to why morale is suffering and why troops are not performing adequately or optimally. We're going to take a look at one specific instance that was affecting troop morale and what one particular leader did to try to solve it. When Captain L. David Marquette took over the U.S. nuclear submarine, the USS Santa Fe, he was facing an unenviable situation. He had been trained on a different class of submarine altogether than the USS Santa Fe. However, right before he was to be assigned, it was decided that he would take over the Santa Fe, a class of submarine again that he had not prepared for, and that was also the lowest performing submarine in the fleet. Now, it wasn't that the crew wouldn't obey orders. It wasn't that the crew was derelict in their duty. Rather, the problem was that they would obey the order no matter whether the order was even possible or not. The result was it yielded further low performance. It was kind of ironic that the crew was performing to order, but because they were performing orders that they couldn't perform, it resulted in low performance. The crew would wait to be told what to do by the captain. The problem was in this instance that Captain Marquette couldn't always tell them what to do because he himself wasn't sure how things on the submarine operated. When he was trained on the other kind of submarine, he knew how everything worked. Now that he was deployed on this kind of submarine, he wasn't sure how anything worked. Thus, in order for the crew to come together and perform, he needed them to be leaders. Captain Marquette was able to turn the ship around, which, by the way, is the name of his book, by shifting the model of leadership from a leader-follower model, the captain is a leader, the crew are the followers, to a leader-leader model, in which the crew was empowered to provide their insights and help make decisions. The crew was able to critically think, to help formulate the problem, to help think through the factors related to the problem that they needed to overcome to execute the mission. And as a result, they were all able to formulate a problem together in a way that allowed for more successful execution and completion of a mission. Here, the problem wasn't a lack of military standards and order, but it was being used as a rationalization to disengage. There wasn't a lack of obeying orders, but obeying too many orders. A completely different problem. Captain Marquette also needed to formulate what his goals were in terms of what he was trying to achieve. If Captain Marquette had the goal of having a disciplined crew, then it would be mission accomplished. They were disciplined to the extent that they would perform orders that they knew were incorrect and were unexecutable, thus demonstrating their inability to act on their critical thinking. On the other hand, if his goal was to create an effective crew in terms of accomplishing the mission at hand, then he had to take another approach. In the end, his new approach resulted in the Santa Fe becoming the best performing nuclear submarine from being the worst one, literally turning the ship around. So, how can you go about improving the ways you formulate a question or a problem? Well, first, you can apply root cause analysis, or the 5 whys. Continue to ask why something is taking place until you get to what actually is the root cause of the problem, or at least gets you closer to what the root cause might be. For instance, let's say we have poor military morale. We would ask the question, well, why is there poor morale? We get to the statement, because the crew are on long deployments. So we might ask the next question, why do long deployments cause low morale? Now, again, don't assume you know the answer to this question. There might be many answers to this question, but you might pick a particular one and explore it even further. Let's say long deployments cause low morale because troops are worried about their families. Well, why are troops worried about their families? Once again, we dig a little deeper with objective analysis. Because of a lack of financial resources for the family. So long deployments, low financial resources cause a lot of worry and low morale. Okay, why do low financial resources cause distress for troops on long deployments? Well, it might just be because military families often suffer from food insecurity because they don't have a lot of financial resources, which are further augmented by long troop deployments, which lead to low morale. And in fact, food insecurity is a major factor in troop deployment low morale. The RAND Corporation, for instance, published a report that states, quote, approximately 15.4% of all active duty personnel would be classified by the US Department of Agriculture as having low food security in 2018. Another 10.4% would be classified as having very low food security. Food insecurity was much higher among those living on post, and of those classified as food insecure in 2018, 14% reported using food assistance in the past year. Now, why long deployments and food insecurity isn't the only reason for low morale or for worrying about families while on long deployments, it is one that did have an impact on the military and continues to have an impact on the US military. Now, recognizing this impact was one of the things that led the Military Family Advisory Network to create fun food drives for the US military families. Creating these food drives was addressing not only food insecurity, but also addressing issues of low morale while on long deployments. Second, you can build your own causal models to help conduct a systems analysis. When you're doing this, there are statistical techniques and mathematical approaches to building and testing causal models. And there's a lot to say about that. But even if you're not going that far, just whiteboarding the potential variables and their relations to each other can give you a big picture understanding of what the different factors are and the different ways that you can formulate the problem. Third, you can think of different factors that cause the outcome that you are exploring. When we think about what factors cause a radicalism in a society, what factors do we traditionally think about, and what factors might we think about differently based on our causal modeling, based on formulating the problem? What factors contribute to morale? What factors lead to resiliency in society, or literally anything else? We can explore, and we need to explore, a range of causal and intervening variables so that we better understand the ways in which they're impacting one another. Again, think beyond what you assume is the problem or have been told is a problem, and look more deeply at other factors that could be at the root of the problem. Fourth, we might even think about for whom is the issue a problem. It might seem obvious that something is a problem, but in fact might not be a problem for some people. This leads us to think about who has the power to define something as a problem and as a result worthy of exploration, and who does not have that power and whose concerns are never heard or addressed. Now remember, by thinking critically about the process and outcome of problem formulation, in critical thinking, we can go deeper into how we think about and understand topics and further develop and improve our critical thinking.